Okay, so does everybody have a paper in front of them with chocolate on everything except for the one in the top in the middle that says Baker's?
Yes.
Does everybody have a napkin and a spoon and some water? Yeah, I do.
Okay. And guys, the dark chocolate one should be purple. Okay.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Andy Herneisen. How many of you had Mrs. Herneisen at the middle school? Awesome, that's my mom. And so I went to Connerweiser. I graduated a while ago. Not quite as long ago as, oh, I'm not, that's mean.
Okay, I'm 1 year.
Mrs. Whitman is 1 year older than me.
But I didn't go to Weiser.
But she didn't go to Weiser. But we still like her anyway. Anyway, I went to Connerweiser, and when I was growing up, I thought I wanted to be a chef, and I thought I wanted to own a restaurant. And my parents were okay with that. They just wanted to make sure that I knew what I was getting myself into. So we went to a local restaurant where my dad knew the owner, and she came out and sat down with us in the booth and was telling us how she has to fire people and she has to do the bookwork and, pay bills and do scheduling. And if people call off or quit, she has to clear the tables when it's busy. And even when she did cook, it was the same things over and over again. So she didn't really have fun with that like she thought she was going to. So she said, hey, if I was starting all this all over again, I think I would look into food science. And I had no idea what food science was. So I came back to school, went to the guidance counselor, because we had the internet, but it was like, okay, and read about food science and found that it was a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of biology, a little bit of nutrition, all together around making food. So I was like, this seems interesting to me. I like science. I like food, and ended up going to Penn State to get a degree in food science. Now, food scientists don't usually end up working in a kitchen at a restaurant. They're kind of the step before that, developing new products for people to eat. So food scientists come up with different flavors of things that already exist and create whole new products. So think about when you're walking through the grocery store, all those things that you can buy had to be thought of by somebody, the recipe made just perfect, and then made in the factory to make sure that it's going to be the same every time, because you don't want to buy a bag of Oreos and they taste one way one time, and then the next time you buy them, they taste different. You want it to taste the same every time. So after I got my food science degree from Penn State, I started working for the Hershey Company, which is why we're talking about chocolate today. I worked in the lab, and I tested with some coworkers, it wasn't just me. So my group tested all of the chocolate and all of the ingredients to make sure that it wasn't going to make anybody sick. Because how terrible would that be if you'd eat Hershey Kiss and then get sick from that because there was bad bacteria or germs in there that made you sick. So we checked to make sure everything was safe. One of the fun things that I got to do when I worked at Hershey was go to the sensory evaluation lab. So what do you think sensory evaluation is? And you maybe guess by the things that you've got in front of you today.
How it looks and tastes?
Yeah, so it's a fancy way of saying professional taste testing. So there's actually people who wake up every day and go to work and they taste food and they give their opinion on that. And that sounds really exciting, right? That sounds like I could do that. I could sit and eat all day and then give it a yum or a yuck. But they have to taste some things that might not always taste so great. One of the ingredients that we're going to see in chocolate is something called cocoa butter. So it's fat. So it's kind of like, did you ever bake with Crisco or see what Crisco shortening looks like? Do you ever taste it by itself? Did you ever taste some cold butter just by itself? It doesn't taste really good. It tastes really good on toast, but by itself, it's not really so great. And if you taste the same thing or you're tasting all day, every day, you can imagine you get really full, right? So the professional taste testers expectorate. What does expectorate mean? Maybe you listen to the soundtrack to Beauty and the Beast. Gaston is especially good at expectorating. What is it? They spit it out. That grosses me out. You walk through the room, they've got their spit cup, and you see people go back in there, and I'm just like, oh, can't do that. I like gag when I spit out toothpaste in the morning. So they do that. So they don't eat, especially if you ate chocolate all day. Another really fun thing that was in the building where I worked at Hershey were the test kitchens. So it was these two older grandmotherly-like ladies who would just bake all day. They'd make cookies and cake, and they'd come up with recipes for the back of the bag of chocolate chips, the back of the cocoa box. There's little recipe booklets, especially around Christmas, that will be at the grocery store that people can buy, because they want to come up with all kinds of creative ways of how you can use a Hershey Kiss in a dessert so that people buy more Hershey Kisses. And when your name came to the top of the list, it was your turn to go to the kitchen and taste the things that they baked for you and read through the recipe and see if it made sense or not, if there's anything you would change about it, if you would make it at home, why or why not. And that was always really fun to do that. There'd be 3 or 4 things that you got to taste. And even as a grown-up, there were a couple times when I left work kind of bent over because my belly hurt because I ate too much chocolate throughout the day. One day it was really bad. I could barely get to my car, and I was sitting there. I was like, why did I do this to myself? And I was like, I'll never do that again. And then I did it again later on when there's good things, because it's really hard to say no to those kinds of things. So those were the things that we did in the building, but I also had responsibilities for things outside of my regular office. So Hershey is a global company. So what does that mean? It's all around the world. There's factories all over the world, and people eat Hershey products all over the world. So it was part of my job to go to those other factories and make sure those labs were testing things correctly, that they were following the directions. We know how important it is to follow directions, because if we don't always have the same outcome. So following directions is really important, making sure they have the proper materials they needed, the lab equipment, the budget that they needed to be able to buy things that they needed for testing. So I got to do a lot of traveling all around the world. It was also there in case they had questions. So if they'd call me on the phone, I could answer their questions. But what do you think a challenge would be if I was supporting factories all around the world and they were calling me? What time of day do you think they'd call me? 1:30 in the morning or the afternoon?
Afternoon.
Sometimes if I was lucky. But we know that even here, I'll just leave it there, that way I won't drop it again. We know that even here in the United States, we have different time zones. So if you go out to Chicago, they're an hour behind. Colorado's an hour behind that. California is 3 hours behind here. So if you go to the other side of the world, you can be completely opposite. So it's 9:30 in the morning here. In China, it's 9:30 at night. So sometimes I'd be laying in bed and I'd hear my phone buzz, and I could tell I used to have my phone and my work phone. They lived in separate pockets. They never visited each other. And I'd hear it ringing and I'd think, oh. And then I'd pull the phone over onto my bed to see who it was and then answer them. So while it was fun to go to those other places, to eat food in other countries, to make friends with people in other countries, sometimes it was challenging dealing with those time zone differences. I left Hershey a couple of years ago. Bothering me that it's on the floor. I just won't pick it up, then I won't drop it again. I left Hershey a couple of years ago. People think, well, if you had a job where you ate chocolate and you got to travel and do taste testing, why would you ever leave? And I left because Hershey was having some financial trouble. People weren't buying as much chocolate as they had in the past. We know that chocolate is delicious and we like to eat it, but if you eat chocolate all day, you get a bellyache. And we know that chocolate doesn't have a lot of good nutrients, things that we need to grow. We know that if we eat a lot of chocolate, it's not good for our overall health. It's fine if we have a little bit now and then, but you don't want to eat it all day, every day. So people weren't buying as much chocolate. So rather than saying, hey guys, you know what, we don't need as many people to work here anymore, so sorry, you're fired, and you're fired, they asked for volunteers. And if you volunteered to quit, they paid you some money. So it was like, you mean you're gonna pay me to quit? Like usually when you quit a job, you stop getting paid. So I was like, I'll go find another job if you're gonna pay me money to stop working here. And they were like, oh, thank you so much. Because then it doesn't sound like a bad story. They don't have to say, oh, we had to fire these people and they don't have jobs anymore. They can just say, hey, they volunteered to leave. So it worked out for them and it worked out for me, because now I work for Penn State. And I mentioned I went to Penn State for college, so it felt like coming back home. So I work for Penn State Extension, and Penn State Extension is a county-based program. So here we live in Berks County, we've got Lancaster County, Lebanon County, there's 67 counties, so smaller areas, segments throughout the state. And Penn State Extension has an office in all 67 counties. And we take the university's research, resources, and expertise out into the community. I do a lot of training for people who work in restaurants. I do food safety training for them. It's a blue and white Serve Safe certificate. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Next time you go to a restaurant, look for that. They have to have that hanging up somewhere that customers can see it. And that just shows that they came to class, they studied enough to pass the test, and means that they should know how to keep food safe, how to keep people from getting sick from eating contaminated food. So in that class, we talk about the importance of washing our hands and doing that often, and making sure that if we drop something on the floor, we don't just pick that up and set it back on the countertop and keep working. Mrs. Whitten, why do you look so guilty? No, I'm just kidding.
I went to his class.
She
and
did.
I got the second highest grade in the class.
She
so.
did. She sat there with her pink poofy pen and took notes.
I'm an excellent student.
She was a very good student. So we talk about things like that. We talk about if we're cooking meat, to make sure that we cook it to the proper temperature. And we use a thermometer to make sure that it's thoroughly cooked. I also work with nonprofit organizations like churches and fire companies who aren't required to have that same training, but it's still important to make sure that they're handling food safely as well. But today, we're not going to talk about food safety. While I think that's really exciting, it's not always the most exciting.
How many classes did you go to last year? Or this year? Tell them please the country.
Okay, so earlier this year, my boss and I spent a month in Africa. We went to Ethiopia, Uganda, and Mozambique, and we were teaching people about food safety, and we were specifically working with people who work in testing laboratories to make sure that they're doing it correctly. So back to what I used to do at Hershey, working in the lab. Because some of them have training, some don't. So this person trained that person, trained that person, trained that person, and they didn't have things written down. So you ever play Pass It Down the Alley where you whisper something to the person next to you and it changes along the way? That would happen there. We tried really hard not to get sick when we were in those countries. We drank bottled water and not the water from the sink. We tried to make sure that the food that we were eating was cooked to kill any germs on them, but we still got sick, even though we were trying really, really hard. I don't know if you heard in the news recently what's going on in Uganda. Did anybody hear about that? Something new? A new disease, I know it's not a new disease, but a disease that's moved into Uganda. You heard about Ebola? It's a virus that's really, really deadly. It was next door in the Congo, but it crossed over. Disease doesn't see the line in the dirt and say, oops, I'm going to stay in this country, so it spread over. So luckily that wasn't there when we were there, or we wouldn't have been able to go. So anyway, we're going to go back and talk about chocolate. So before we taste, we're going to talk a little bit about chocolate processing. So chocolate starts out by growing trees called cacao trees. And cacao trees produce these pods. And these pods are the fruit of the tree. And unlike most other fruit trees, the fruit grows directly on the trunk. Think about an apple tree or a peach tree. The fruit grows out on the ends of the branches, not on the trunk. But this is unique, and it grows directly on them. And one of the theories for that is that these are really heavy. So the branches, if they have all that heavy fruit on them, might sink, or that's just how they grew. So cacao trees grow close to the equator, about 20 degrees north and south of the equator. So what's the weather like in this section of the world? Yeah. Hot, kind of like here today. It's like this and even worse all year long down there. And is the air moist or dry? What do you think? In this section of the world where it's really hot, I'll give you a hint. It wasn't dry. What's the other one? It's moist. So they like that environment. Can you think of some countries along that fall within those red lines? Yeah.
Australia.
Australia's part of that, yeah. And you think of some others? So Africa is the continent. Can you think of some countries in Africa? I just said two of them that fall into that. So Ethiopia and Uganda are there. A big range, Ghana and the Ivory Coast. There's a lot of chocolate that comes from there. What's this country? Oh wait, I have a pointer. Why am I walking all the way over to it? Yes. Mexico, yeah. So here's some of those countries. Ivory Coast and Ghana, Nigeria, a lot of the cacao trees grow in that region. And this actually caused some challenges a few years ago. In the Ivory Coast, they had a civil war. So when they were trying to harvest their crops and get them to ships or trains or trucks to transport them. That was difficult. A few years ago, there was an Ebola outbreak in the western part of the African continent. So one of the ways that they were trying to control the spread of the disease was controlling how people moved. So if I was exposed to the virus, they didn't want me driving to the next town and the next town and the next town. So they were trying to keep the people where they were to keep the disease from spreading. But what would happen is there would be some workers coming from one area to another, or again, to be able to transport those products. And that was difficult to do. So the price of chocolate went up during those types of events. But luckily, things have stabilized there and kind of gone more back to normal. So it talked about those, some of those challenges with wars and disease. There is another issue. As those prices of chocolate go up and down, the price of some other crops can go up. So for example, growing rubber trees. So a farmer might say, well, that's great, I've been growing these cacao trees, but I can grow rubber trees and make more money. So I'm going to cut down all my cacao trees and grow rubber instead, or palm trees to make palm oil. So where does that leave a company like Hershey and say, no, keep those trees because we need them. We need them if we still want to have chocolate. I mean, rubber's great and everything, but we would rather have chocolate sometimes too. Or families saying, this is a hard lifestyle and I want something better for my kids. I want them to be able to not just be a cacao farmer because that's what I do. I want them to do whatever they want to do. So people aren't staying in the farm anymore. So just some things to don't necessarily think about that go into making your chocolate. So here's a little bit of the process. So the cacao pods grow on the tree, and they're the size of like a Nerf football. These are harvested by hand. They ripen at different periods, so certain ones are ready before other ones, so you can't just come in with a big machine and knock them all off the tree at one time. Usually they're harvested, they'll have a knife that they tape to the end of a stick so they can go up and cut them off because they could be higher up in the tree. On the inside of the pod are these beans. And it's not a bean like a green bean or a lima bean that you would eat by itself, but you'll see why that's important. So we scrape out the beans, and they have this film on the outside. It's kind of like the texture of an orange when you open an orange, and those sections have that the white part that's sometimes kind of chewy. They've got that on the inside. So they're scooped out and they pile them onto banana leaves and let them sit on the jungle floor in that warm, moist environment, and they start to ferment. And during that process, bacteria start to grow, and that produces flavors, it produces acid as a byproduct, and it kind of eats away that slimy pulp on the outside of the beans, and it changes the flavor of the final product. Kind of like we can ferment bread. So there's yeast that grows in the flour and the water, and it changes the flavor. It produces carbon dioxide gas as a byproduct, which is what makes the bread rise. There's other products that are fermented, like, do any of you like to eat sauerkraut? Any of your parents make sauerkraut on on January 1st, pork and sauerkraut. It's a Berks County thing to do. So that's fermented cabbage, so it changes the flavor. Then the beans are dried, and they can be dried. Sometimes they'll do it on the roof of the house or the roof of a barn. Sometimes they'll do it on boards out in the sun, on tarps on the ground. In Brazil, there's cacao trees are grown in Brazil. They will want to speed this process up, so they'll put the beans on something and they'll build a fire underneath. But do you think that has any effect on the beans? Have you ever roasted marshmallows on a fire or cooked hot dogs on a fire, and then later that day, what do your clothes and your hair smell like?
The fire.
They smell like the fire. They smell like the smoke. So the beans pick up that flavor, and they can smell a little smoky as well. So if you go to Brazil and you buy a Hershey bar in Brazil, it's made with those beans that they like. And some people describe it as tasting hammy, like bacony chocolate. So ham is smoked, bacon is smoked, which, I don't know, I think that sounds kind of good. Some people eat it and they're like, oh, this is awful. But that's what they're used to, and that's what they really like. So anyway, beans are dried, and then they're roasted. So what does roasting mean if we roast something? Not like how I'm roasting Mrs. Whitman with jokes today. So if we roast something, what does that mean?
Guys, you can call out answers. I know you guys are also sweet, so raising your hand. Like, that'll go away when you hit high school, but you can just call out answers, right?
What does it mean if we roast something? Yeah, what do we do?
Like a fire and roast it?
Yeah, like we're adding heat to it. Can you think of some other products that are roasted that you might see on the label? Any other food products? Yeah.
Peanuts?
Peanuts are roasted. What else?
Almonds?
Almonds, yeah, so all kinds of nuts. Coffee, using coffee roasters or dark roast coffee. So when we roast things, it changes the flavor. So obviously it dries it out, but it changes the flavor. It makes them turn even browner. We know brown food tastes good, right? You think about cookies get brown and French fries get brown, right? Anybody can name a brown food they don't like, right? You like brown food. So it changes the flavor. It also makes these safe to eat. So if we have those cocoa beans that we just have laying on the jungle floor, and you can imagine, you could have bugs running through that, you could have mice running through that. When they're laying out on the ground to dry, you have birds walking through, chickens walking through, cats chasing the chickens, dogs chasing the cats, chasing the chickens, kids chasing the dogs, chasing the cat, chasing the kittens, running through there. So roasting that kills any germs that were introduced during that process. We take the beans and crack them open, and there are these little nibs on the inside. Nibs remind me of Nerds. Nerds candy, right? Those little pebbles. That's what is on the inside of the bean. And we take those nibs and use heat to melt them down, and we get chocolate liquor as our next product. So we can use chocolate liquor as an ingredient in baking, as an ingredient in chocolate bars. We can take that one step further, separate the solids from the fat. We've got cocoa powder and cocoa butter. And cocoa butter, you might see that in like hand lotion, but it's also a big ingredient in chocolate as well. So in chocolate, we have some proportion of cocoa powder and cocoa butter mixed back together to get whatever product we're trying to get. Add sugar and milk for extra flavor, change the texture. We add some vanilla flavor. Also add soy lecithin. Has anybody ever heard of lecithin before? Do you know what it does? So lecithin is an emulsifier, which means it helps fat and water stay together. If you've ever made Italian dressing, it separates out. Or if you see some oil in the parking lot and it's raining, the oil separates out. So fat and water don't like to mix together. Where's the fat in cocoa butter? Here, I'll show you this. Where's the fat in chocolate? Cocoa butter. Where's the water in chocolate? Where's the water come from? Milk? Yeah. So those need to stay together, and that helps do that. So we are going to taste some different things today. Mrs. Whitman, can you put some of the baking chocolate into those 2 cups, and then we can pass that around, and then can somebody carry the crock pot liner? All right, so when you get the cup or the crock pot of baking chocolate, you're going to take your spoon and just dip the tip. You can pass it around to the... You can start in the front. You want to take just the tip and dip that into the chocolate, and then
There's
just
a certain order we're going. With
just
the
kind
chocolate,
of just kind of hold it so that it doesn't drip all over the table. And we're going to wait, and we're going to all taste it together. So after you've got your small scoop, you can smell it. Don't touch it to your nose, though.
If you don't, just don't touch anything else. It's the bakers. I would
Good more than a tip, but that's okay. That's okay. All right, hold over your napkin.
Right, now,
just have it up on your hand.
Adults, feel free to grab a spoon, too.
let's try this.
What does it smell like? Just the tip, just a little bit.
It doesn't, right?
So those of you who have it, what does it smell like? Smell like brownies baking? Smells like chocolate?
Smells like Hershey.
Camera on.
It smells good, right? Which, fun fact, when you go to Chocolate World and you smell chocolate, they have a crock pot of baking chocolate with a fan blowing on it. It's not very high tech. All right, so everybody got some? All right, so let's give it a taste. What do you think? It's so disappointing, right? It's awful. So, how many of you took a really big spoonful, even though I said just a little tip? And do you regret it now?
Tastes like dirty chalk.
Dirty chalk?
Dirty chalk.
Oh yeah, does it coat your teeth?
No.
Did anybody say they like this? So imagine, the Aztecs and the Mayans used to use chocolate as currency. It was reserved for their king. Like imagine walking through the woods and tasting this and being like, wow, that's delicious. Said nobody. But somebody thought, hey, let's add that and we'll start eating that. So not very good. Yeah.
Guys, have any of you ever had that before? Maybe someone in your family was baking and you thought, oh my God, I'm going
Tastes like
to
medicine.
make some of this chocolate. And whoever was baking probably let you, or you were bugging for it or something, because I feel like every kid has to do that once. Okay? Because there are a lot of recipes that call for this unsweetened baking chocolate, because then the recipe uses sugar. Uses a lot of sugar to sweeten it up.
Sweetened up. All right, so take just a piece of your cracker. You have to make them last throughout the day. These are unsalted saltines. So what are these going to do? They kind of absorb and dry up your mouth. It helps clear that out. So take a little bite of cracker, a little sip of water. Why do you think we're using unsalted saltines? If we use ones with salt on the top, what would you be tasting right now? The salt, and we don't want that. We want your mouth to be as clean as possible. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next one. The next one is 70% cacao, which means either the cocoa butter or the cocoa powder. So when we taste chocolate, the first thing we want to do is break it and listen to the snap. This one has a good snap. And then we can smell it. Now, when we taste this, don't just chew it up right away. Let it melt in your mouth. And as it starts to melt, you can slowly chew it. If you just gobble it down like a dog treat, you're not really going to taste it. As we taste chocolate, we can taste some different flavors. And professional taste testers will use a tasting wheel that describes different categories and then even individual flavors. It's kind of hard to see. One of the tasting strategies is to open your mouth, but close your lips, so there's a lot of space, and then breathe through your nose. You can also smack your tongue up against the roof of your mouth. Bring some air into your mouth.
I want you all to go home and do that at dinner tonight.
Right.
See what the parents say.
Do you ever have, like, I don't know, my grandmother does, she tastes something, she goes, when she does that, right? But like, that's really a thing that these professional taste testers will do. So this tastes a lot better than the 100%,
Like that one?
doesn't it?
The cream's better.
That's the Lindt brand, so this one is not Hershey's. Okay, but
Do you taste a little bit, it's called astringency, so a little bit of maybe burning, sometimes in your throat, sometimes on your tongue. That's common in darker chocolate or a higher percentage chocolate. Especially after it's all gone and you've just got that residue. Anybody see what I mean? Okay, so take another piece of cracker. It's like the Orbit's gum commercial. Dirty mouth, clean mouth. So next one we're going to taste Special Dark. You can buy it in the big bar, the small bar, miniatures, but also Hershey Kisses. So this is going to be harder to break. So you're probably not going to be able to snap this one. But give that a taste. Remember to let it melt a little bit. We'll try to save half of this for next time. How many of you liked the 70%, the first one we tasted?
the last one, not the melted one.
How about this one? Do you like this one? What does this one taste like? Do you taste any? Coffee. Some coffee? Maybe you taste cinnamon? I taste cinnamon in this one.
Now let me throw some cooking in there for you. Everyone tastes foods completely different. That's why when you send something back at a restaurant and just people get mad, the chef should never get mad. Because what's spicy to me may not be spicy to you and vice versa, and salty and everything. So you're all going to taste this a little bit differently. Okay? Always keep that in mind. So if someone's like, oh, I really like this, and you think it's gross, don't make a big deal out of it because everyone tastes things differently.
You know, every Skittle tastes the same. It's just shit.
Same thing with like
Except the
strict
green ones.
cereal and Fruit Loops and all that.
Did this taste sweeter than, how many of you had Special Dark before? Did it taste sweeter now than you remembered it? From tasting the dark ones first? That's right, so we'll clean up again. Other things that professional taste testers will use to clear their palate, apple slices. That's good if you're,
I heard that like if you smell coffee beans and all that.
for your nose, clear out your nose. Yeah, like if you're smelling perfume. Hershey makes Icebreakers brand gum and mints. So imagine if you're eating some gum, and you have to spit it out and taste another one. That gum that flavor stays in your mouth for a while. So apple slice, cracker, and water, and then there would be a timer. You'd have to sit there and wait for it to clear out. You can overwhelm your palate. You can overwhelm your taste buds. So you kind of want to take it slow when you're tasting. All right, so we've been tasting in order from darkest to lightest, but I'm saving the Hershey chocolate for last because that's the one that we're most familiar with. How many of you have eaten a Symphony bar before?
I don't think I've ever had one. I didn't even realize they still made them.
Really? Like Symphony. All right, so this is one that we'll be able to snap. So hold it up to your ear, give it a snap. Does it sound different than the 70%? The 70% had a nice snap. It's kind of thudded. What does this one taste like? Caramel? Milk? There's a lot of milk in this one. Vanilla? If you closed your eyes and didn't know this was chocolate, could you think you were eating a caramel? This one tastes really sweet, especially when you have just tasted. They make one of these that has crunchy toffee in it.
I had them in my cart at first. I'm like, oh wait, that's not the red one. There's the blue one.
This also, chocolate goes through a refining process where it goes under these rollers and it takes any grittiness and breaks those particles into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. This is another reason it tastes extra smooth. All right, so one more. You can do this with your family. Get some different things, have them taste. Another type of test the professional taste testers would do is there would be 3 different pieces of chocolate, and you had to taste them all and figure out which one is different. Maybe it was 2 different factories that made them. Maybe one was old, one was new. You could do that. You could set up an experiment with your friends or with your family. You could buy Hershey brand chocolate chips and then Giant brand chocolate chips and see if they taste different. And you could say, rank them on a scale of 1 to 10, which one do you like better? All right, last one. Hershey milk chocolate. Again, the chocolate bar and the Kiss is the same chocolate that goes into that. Get that a smell. Does that smell like you remember?
Yeah. You know when you leave it in the bag for too long, like the bag smells like that. I hate that. And then get other
That extra smell?
Yeah, like you leave it in there for like a year. And then you eat it. You just having a craving, so you just, going around the room. Stuff. Under your bed.
Does this taste different than you remember? There's probably the most common one people eat. Some people say Hershey chocolate has like a Romano cheese, Parmesan cheese flavor to it. Baby vomit.
I don't think, people realize that tongue goes well with cheese, so I don't know.
Not at all, I think.
Baby vomit, huh?
But that
So we're all
smell,
gonna take now.
this does have a stronger smell. I know exactly what you mean.
Whenever people give it to me, it's like when I'm trick-or-treating, it's awesome.
Yeah.
What is that trash?
So were you surprised that you liked any of these that you didn't think you would? Did you think you'd like the 70% or the 45%? They're actually pretty good. People usually say, oh, I just like milk chocolate, I don't like dark chocolate. But the dark chocolate was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
So, if you have any pieces left, you can keep eating them. That's yours. Does anybody have...
What was her favorite? She liked the 70%. 70%? 45%. The Hershey dark?
You could average, put all four in your mouth at one time and then figure out what percent that would be. You like the unsalted cracker?
I didn't even know they made unsalted saltine.
Does anybody have any questions about chocolate or Hershey or food science or Penn State or life?
The other side has more.
All right, well, you guys were good participants today. Thank you for listening and coming to this session. Try some of this out on your family. Set up a tasting for them. Do you think they'd like it?
Or what about, there's a new, the new Coke came back?
Oh, yeah.
So try the new Coke and then the regular.
Do they still have that clear Coke? Remember that for a
I
while?
don't think so. Like they came out with a new Coke in like the 80s and everyone needed it. So they
Oh,
brought back-
you could do, there's like Mountain Dew with sugar and Mountain Dew with corn syrup. Try those two.
You gotta have a really good Coke, like in a glass bottle, to try it with the new Coke that came out.
My grandparents used to have a store. It's where, what's the physical therapy going to home store on the right? Oh my gosh, what's it called? Westernburg. Westernburg?
Sure.
Anyway, they lived there and they had a store and used to reuse the glass bottles. And they got some case of Coke one time and there was a straw like down in the bottle. It was filled up with Coke and your cap put on it. So like the last person had a straw in it and it didn't come out in the washer. She still has it. Cool. All right, well, if you could put all your trash on top of the paper, if you have any crumbs, pull those down and then drop them in the trash can on your way out, and you're good to go to your next thing, right?
Yeah, you guys are good.
Which side? Where? Over here. Okay.
So they're doing the same presentation.
But I don't think there's many kids.
Oh, no, sorry.
Chocolate has to be fondue. Now I'm excited.
Okay. All right. Have a good day.
Oh, yeah. I've got chocolate tasting at the Hershey Museum. I have like a 90% chocolate in my house. And it's so 90% cacao? Cacao?
We're not gonna talk to you for a while. I know it's pure torture. You guys have to straighten out.
Are you doing it again?
Baker's chocolate.
What are you talking about?
Just the big chocolate fondue thing. Wait, hold on. First off, you cannot.
Oh, yeah.
Guys, you will need water. So if you have water, get it out. If not, we're gonna give you cups, and then you need to get water from the water fountain outside in the hallway. Or not.
Thank you.
You're kidding.
Right outside.
Let's hope this water's not good stuff.
The exact same seed.
I did some of it.
No. I mean, I can.
Are you going to text culture?
Not all of them.
I'm usually
Really limping around there.
It's fine. We have a Brady here. Yeah, I know.
Somebody left me there, so I didn't.
It's not even Brady.
Hey, Brady. All right, you're all checked in.
Just so I can eat more cheese.
All right, ready? All right, well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Andy Herneisen. Did any of you have Mrs. Herneisen in the middle school? Okay, that's my mom. And I'm a Conner-Weiser grad. I graduated in 2003, which was probably before you were born, right? But that's the year you were born? 2002. Oh, all right.
That's the year I graduated.
It's
1996.
right, born year graduate. Don't you forget that.
Yeah, we were born in this thing called like the 90s. Or the 80s.
That's crazy.
We were,
80s, oh my God.
we were born in the 1900s.
Well, actually, time travel.
Doesn't that sound forever ago? Anyway, so when I was a student here at Conner-Weiser, I thought that I wanted to be a chef. And I thought that I wanted to own my own restaurant. And my parents were like, that's great, but they just wanted to make sure that I knew what I would be getting myself into. So we went to a local restaurant where my dad knew the owner. She came out and sat down with us and talked to me about what her experience was like. And she liked to cook, thought she wanted to have a restaurant, but she said, you know, now I have to do the paperwork and pay bills. I have to fire people, and if somebody quits or it gets busy, I have to clear tables and do dishes. And even if I'm cooking, it was a 50s diner, so they had like burgers and french fries and ice cream. She wasn't really cooking. So she said, if I could go back and do it all over again, I think I would look into food science. So I'm like, okay, that sounds kind of interesting. So back in the 1900s, the internet was around, but it was slow and it wasn't so great. So I went to the guidance office and talked to them about food science and found that it's a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of biology, a little bit of nutrition, all around food. So I thought, this is great. I always liked science. I liked, cooking, could put those two together. So I ended up going to Penn State for getting a bachelor's degree in food science. And after I graduated from Penn State, I started working for the Hershey Company. So I worked in a lab And we tested all of the ingredients and the finished chocolate to make sure that it was safe to eat. Because how terrible would that be if you'd get sick from eating a Hershey Kiss, right? That's not something that you want to happen, and it's not something the company wants to happen either, because if your products make people sick, they're not going to buy them again, and they're going to tell all their friends that they got sick from that, and that's not really good for business. So we would check to make sure there was no bacteria, no germs in there that could make somebody sick. Hershey is a global company. So what does that mean that it's a global company?
Make stuff for the whole world.
Yeah, make stuff for the whole globe, for the whole world. So people all over the world eat Hershey products, and Hershey products are manufactured all over the world. So part of my job was to go to those factories all around the world and make sure that the laboratories in those factories were testing things as they should, that they were following the proper procedure, that they were following the directions exactly as they were given. Because you know, if you don't follow the directions on stuff, that you don't get the outcome you were expecting. Making sure they had the right budget, the amount of money that they needed to buy materials to complete the testing. Part of that involved me going and visiting. So it was great. I got to travel. I got to go eat the food in different countries and learn about the culture of other countries and make friends with people in other countries. But whenever they had a problem and something broke in the lab or there was some kind of issue and they needed help, they would call me. And what time of day do you think people from all over the world called me? At night, early in the morning. So even here in the United States, you know, we have different time zones. So, you know, it's 10:30 here, it's only 9:30 in Chicago, it's 8:30 in Denver, Colorado, and it's 7:30 out in California. So all around the world, there's different time zones. So right now in China, it's 10:30 at night instead of being 10:30 in the morning. So sometimes I'd be laying in bed and I'd hear my phone ring and I'd think, oh no, what time is it? And I was like, well, I'm not asleep yet. So I'd drag the phone by the cord over into my bed and see who it was. I'd just be laying there in bed talking to somebody in China. And then, you know, sometimes they'd ask, you know, I know you never ask silly questions, but sometimes they'd ask silly questions and it'd be like, read the procedure. They'd be like, what do I do next? And I'm like, read the procedure. It's all documented. But sometimes, you know how that is, right? You do that. Even though you have the instruction sheet, you ask the teacher, what do I do next? It's like, read the paper. So while it was fun getting to talk to those people and travel, sometimes it wasn't so fun when people were constantly needing things from me. One of the cool things we got to do at Hershey is go down to the sensory evaluation lab. So what do you think sensory evaluation means? What is sensory? Yeah, right. What does sensory mean? Oh, that's century. So it sounds like sensory. So sensory, what's the first part of the word? Sense. What are our senses? Right, our hearing, smelling, tasting. So this is a fancy way of saying professional taste testing. So there are people who wake up in the morning and drive to work and they taste stuff and they get paid to say yum or yuck. Which sounds like a great job, right? To be able to taste stuff and get paid for that. But sometimes they have to taste things that aren't so good. That's how we know if they're good or not. And they'll say, no, that's not very good. Sometimes they're tasting ingredients. Have you ever tasted, vinegar by itself, not very good. Have you ever tasted butter, just a piece of cold butter by itself? It's not.
A big one, vanilla.
Oh yeah, vanilla extract by
Good
itself.
vanilla smells, but then when you actually taste it by itself, you drink it, you're the best.
Don't drink it, it's 80% alcohol. It is.
But then when you add it to things, it really,
Yeah, like butter on toast tastes really good. But so next time you have the butter out, just taste a little bit by itself. It's not very good. So you have to taste some of those things. So
all right, guys.
the professional taste testers, can you imagine if you were eating chocolate and whatever else all day? What if you worked at a dog food factory? Do they have sensory evaluation? Dogs, right? So imagine if you were eating and tasting all day. You'd get full really fast. So the professional taste testers, and you might know this word if you listen to the Beauty and the Beast soundtrack, because Gaston sings this. He says, "I'm especially good at expectorating." What is expectorating? Spitting. It's a fancy way of saying spitting. So you'd go walk through the room, and that grosses me out. People have their spit cup, they taste something, and then you see them go back into it. Not very good. I like sometimes I gag myself when I spit out toothpaste in the morning. Like, I cannot spit out the food, but so they don't eat it and then get full from that. Another really fun thing in our building that we got to do is when your name came to the top of the list, you got called down to the test kitchen. And in the test kitchen, there was two older grandmotherly-like ladies who would just bake all day long. And sometimes, coming back from a meeting, you would just like happen to walk past the kitchen because sometimes they'd set things out. We could see in the reflection off of this display case if they set things out on the counter. So you'd always check the reflection just to make sure that you weren't missing out on cookies or brownies or cake or something. They would develop recipes that would go in the back of the bag of chocolate chips, on the cocoa container, special cookbooks. On the internet, they had a YouTube channel because they want you to buy the products and make them into stuff, and they want you to make dessert using Hershey's ingredients. So when it was your turn to come, you'd go sit. They had a dining room table in this kitchen that looked like a kitchen from your house, and you'd taste 3 or 4 things and read through the recipe, and then you'd have to say if you liked it, if you'd make it at home, why or why not, if you'd make any changes, what you liked, what you didn't like. And there was one day when I had gone down to the regular sensory room, and I think there was 3 different things we were tasting throughout that morning. We had an ice cream social in our department, and then I got called to the kitchen, and like you never turn it down because then you have to wait until your name comes to the top of the list again, so you maybe only go 3 or 4 times a year. So it was like, they call you, I'm like, of course I'm coming, what time should I be there? And so I had eaten all this stuff, and I was walking out to my car at the end of the day, and I couldn't even stand up straight because I had a bellyache from eating all cake and cookies and chocolate. And I was just driving home, and I was like, I'm never going to do this again. But then I did it again. Even though, being a grown-up and should know better, hey, sometimes it still happens when you work at a place like Hershey. So I actually don't work for Hershey anymore, and you think like that's crazy. If you had a job where you got to travel and eat chocolate all day and have access to really fresh peanut butter cups that just came from the factory and really fresh Twizzlers that are still soft in the package before they get really hard, like that would be great. But Hershey ended up not needing as many workers because people don't eat as much chocolate as they used to. So chocolate is delicious and we love to eat it, but we know it's not the healthiest choice for us. We're not getting nutrients from that, and we're not getting things that are going to keep us full, like protein would keep us full. So if we ate some almonds or a cheese stick, that would be a lot healthier snack than having a handful of Hershey Kisses. So it's still okay to eat chocolate. We just don't want to make that our main food source, like I did a couple times when I worked for Hershey. So rather than saying, hey, you know what, we don't need as many people anymore, so you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, sorry, they asked for volunteers. And if you volunteered to quit, they paid you some money. So it was like, really? Like, I'll go find it. Like, I'll volunteer to quit if you're gonna pay me. Usually when you quit a job, you don't get paid anymore. You don't get any more money. But they gave me money to quit, and there was about 300 of us who did that. So I went to work at Penn State, which was great because I had gone to college at Penn State, loved Penn State. It felt like coming home. And my current boss is a former professor, so I've known her for a long time. Actually, speaking of my boss, she and I spent a month in Africa earlier this year. We went to Ethiopia, Uganda, and Mozambique, and we trained microbiology lab technicians. So what I used to do at Hershey, working in that lab, making sure that food is safe, we did training for people in those 3 countries. Because you'd have somebody who maybe had some official training, but they would train the next person, and they'd train the next person, the next person, and they'd have things written down. So have you ever played the pass it down the alley game where you whisper something to the next person and it changes till it gets to the end? That would happen with laboratory testing, where there's a lot of people in some of those countries who didn't want to follow the rules when it came to testing around food. So they'd have a product that they knew was bad, and they'd knock on the door of the lab, and they'd say, hey, I'm looking for a negative salmonella result, okay? And they pay people, and then that person would be like, yeah, sure. I'll give your result, and they give them the official result in paper and say, yeah, there's no bad bacteria in here. And really, they didn't even test it because they just wanted that piece of paper. So we were talking about keeping records of things that you receive, so that it's a lot harder for people to be making those deals on the side. But I don't usually spend my time at Penn State doing that, so I work for Penn State Extension. And Penn State Extension is a department within the College of Ag, and we take the university's research and resources and expertise out into the community. So I work on the food safety team. We work with restaurants to make sure that the food that they're preparing is going to be safe. Next time you go to a restaurant, look for a blue and white certificate that says Serve Safe. That's a certificate that shows that people came to a class, they learned about how to keep food safe, how to wash your hands, why that's important, why if you drop a spoon on the floor, you don't want to put that spoon in your mouth because it's kind of the same thing as licking the floor, that you want to make sure that when you're cooking meat, that you cook it thoroughly and use a thermometer to make sure that it's cooked thoroughly, making sure that you don't touch raw chicken and have that raw chicken juice in your hands and open the refrigerator door, because somebody else could come behind you and open the refrigerator door, and now they have that raw chicken juice on their hands, and that raw chicken juice can contain bacteria, germs that make us sick. So we talk about all kinds of things related to that, Mrs. Whitman came to my class last summer. She was a very good student. She was quiet. She paid attention. She had a big pink poofy pen like Elwood's, and took good notes. And she got like the second highest score in the class.
Yep, I have that certificate in my classroom. I don't have it hanging up. I should hang it up, but it's
Yeah.
on my desk.
We could put a gold star on it too. I also work with nonprofit organizations who aren't required to have that official training, but it's still important to make sure that if there's a church or a fire company having a fundraiser, that they don't kill people with the spaghetti that they serve. Yeah, we don't want that. We get excited about spaghetti. We don't want to die from eating spaghetti. There was actually a college student who died from eating spaghetti. I'm like excited to tell you the story. So he had this leftover spaghetti, and where do we store leftovers? In the refrigerator. He did not store it in the refrigerator. He stored it just like on the counter in his dorm room and let it go for 5 days.
See, I saw that. Was that real?
And then he ate it.
I believe anyone would ever do that.
Do you think there's fake news? I think it probably happened.
I think it could happen, but
Because of I think it could happen because of the bacteria that it was.
But you will have people that would do that and would somehow live. Like my mother-in-law, she'll have something left over, like a sandwich or something, and I'll be like, you shouldn't take that because you're not going home right away. It's gonna be in your hot car.
Oh, she'll like put it in her purse and like.
That's fine. And she's like, I'll go home later, put it in the birthday tomorrow, and she'll be fine because your body's just like used to it. It just, builds up a tolerance.
I don't know. One of these days, it might catch up with her. But anyway, how did we get on this topic? Oh, spaghetti. We were talking about spaghetti.
And leftovers. Do you guys eat leftovers?
Yes.
Some people won't eat leftovers, and I get it.
I should make a therapist.
How long is it to keep leftovers? How long should you
Like 3 or 4 days.
I say 2 days. 2 days.
A week is a
I feel
lot.
like holidays, like the week, Thanksgiving, you should keep them a little longer because they're really, really good.
No, put them in the freezer if you're not going to use them right away. Anyway, okay, so we got off track.
That's safety, you're good.
So back to what we're doing today. So we're not going to talk about food safety, even though I think that's really exciting. Might not be as exciting as what we're doing today. So we're going to go back and talk about chocolate. So chocolate starts out by growing on trees called cacao trees. How many of you have heard of cocoa before? So somewhere along the line, cacao starts getting referred to as cocoa. But different people make the name change, different steps of the process. But it definitely starts out as a cacao tree. And in a cacao tree, the fruit grows directly on the trunk of the tree, which is unique. Because usually if you see like an apple tree, the fruit grows out on the edge of the branches, not directly on the trunk. But the cacao trees, these pods grow right on the trunk. And they're about the size and shape of a Nerf football. So these pods grow on the trees about 20 degrees north and south of the equator. So what is the climate like in this part of the world? It's hot. Is it humid or dry? Hot and humid, so kind of like today. They have every day, or even worse. Can you think of some countries that fall in this range of the world? Brazil, yeah. Okay, so Africa is a continent. Can you think of some countries within Africa? Uganda, yeah, where I just was. Maybe think of some other countries in Africa. Mozambique, right, because I was just there. That's kind of down in here. So that's borderline. What else? Australia. Egypt, yeah.
South America.
Okay, so that's a continent. So can you think of some countries in the continent?
Sounds like
One near the equator.
Has the same letters as equator?
Ecuador.
You guys
Right?
are good.
No, Chile's down here, so that's it's close. I said close. Anyway, most of the cacao trees are grown in Western Africa, the Ivory Coast, Ghana, and this was a problem a few years ago when there was a civil war in the Ivory Coast. And this was a problem because people were fighting and not, I know, holding on to spoons is hard. People were fighting and not dealing with,
Next one, drink off the floor.
and not growing chocolate. If there were borders set up or roadblocks, that impacted the production. Also, a few years ago in Western Africa, how many of you have seen at the doctor's office, there's signs and it'll have an outline of the continent and it'll say, hey, if you've been to Western Africa in the past however long, you need to tell. Have you seen that there? Do you know why that was?
And for a while, they were asking you.
Yeah. And of course I was like, no. And now I have to be like, yes.
Yep.
Actually, when we got out of the, okay, so Uganda's over in here, and the Congo's in here. The Congo right now has a big outbreak of this same illness. Anybody know the illness? You hear of Ebola? You hear that? They had an outbreak, oh, they still do. And it actually worked its way over across the border into Uganda now. But anyway, when you got to the airport, you had to fill out this form. You had to say what plane you were on, what seat you were at, and they kept track of all that. So if you got Ebola and they were like, oh, he was on that plane, and I was sitting next to you, they could call me and be like, hey, by the way, the guy you sat next to for 4 hours on the plane has Ebola, so you might want to go to the clinic. In the airports, they also had these infrared scanners. Do you ever get your temperature taken by rubbing that thing over your forehead? They had these fancy cameras that could see if you were a little hot, and then if you were, they pulled you aside and then took your took your temperature for real. Making sure that they weren't spreading that disease. So that same thing happened over in Western Africa, where in an effort to control the disease, think about if you've got a cold or if you have pink eye or strep throat, you stay at home because you're not feeling well, but also to help spread that so you don't spread that to other people. So people couldn't go from town to town. Maybe they lived in Reading and had to go down to Philadelphia because that's where the cacao trees were growing, but they couldn't do that because the roads were closed because they didn't want people moving and spreading the illness. Or if you harvested your crop, but now you have to get it somewhere to take it to a ship to send it, or to a train or a truck to get that out. That was difficult. So that put the price of chocolate up a couple of years ago because weren't really able to get it out of that region, had to rely on other parts of the world to source that. There's some other things to think about when growing cacao trees and producing chocolate. As the price of chocolate goes up and down, the price of other things goes up and down as well. So you could be in a moment where the price of chocolate is low, so the farmer's not getting a lot of money, but the price of something else like rubber comes from trees, is higher. So somebody might say, you know what, I'm going to cut down all my cacao trees and I'm going to start growing rubber in its place and get some more money. So like rubber's great and everything, but we still need people growing the cacao trees so that we can eat chocolate. Or farmers might say, you know, I was a cacao farmer and my parents before that were, but I want my kids to have a choice to be able to do something, else. And so maybe they're not going to continue on that legacy. So just some things to think about that you don't necessarily know go into the whole chocolate process. So anyway, back to the basics. So we have those pods that grow on the tree. Those pods are harvested by hand because they all mature at different times. So one might be ready before another one is. And usually they harvest that, they take a knife, tape it to a stick, and then they can cut those pods off the tree. And on the inside of the pods are beans. So sometimes, they look like lima beans, something like that. They don't taste very good though. You want to eat them just plain. And they've got this pulp on the outside, and it's kind of like if you open an orange, that white membrane has a similar texture to that. That's scraped out and placed on banana leaves, and they're allowed to ferment. So during fermentation, bacteria start to grow, and this changes flavors and colors and ends up changing the overall flavor of the chocolate. And other things that we eat are fermented as well. So when we eat bread, the yeast in there starts to eat the sugars in the flour. It produces carbon dioxide gas, and it makes the bread rise, changes flavor. Sauerkraut is a fermented food, fermented cabbage, so there's bacteria that break that down, change flavor and color. How many of you eat sauerkraut? Or how many of your parents make pork and sauerkraut on January 1st? Because that's a Berks County tradition to do that. How many of you just think it stinks and it's nasty? Right? Okay, yeah, most of us. I think that too. But some people just love it. But that's important in chocolate, that fermentation for flavor development. So now we've got these pulpy, wet, sloppy beans that need to be dried. And they can be dried on maybe the roof of a house, and they'll kind of rake through them, or build platforms off the ground, or sometimes just laying on a tarp kind of out in the street so that they can dry out. Now there are some regions of the world where they want to speed that process along. So this is common in Brazil, where they will speed up the drying through by burning fires underneath. So they'll have a raised platform, put fires underneath. So if you've ever made marshmallows around a fire, or made hot dogs on a fire, later on that day, what does your shirt and your hair smell like? Smells like smoke, smells like the fire. So that same flavors can get into the cocoa beans, and you have that smoky fire taste. So if you buy a Hershey bar in Brazil, the chocolate bars some people describe it as tasting hammy or like bacony, have that smoked flavor, which I think would be kind of good. You know, you ever heard of chocolate covered bacon? Right? But other people taste that and say, oh, yeah, that's really gross. I don't want anything to do with that. But something that some people like. So after the beans are dried, they are roasted. So what does it mean if we roast something? What other foods can you think of that are roasted? Nothing? You never had anything roasted? Okay, so peanuts are roasted. Almonds, right? So other nuts we've seen roasted. Coffee, dark roast, coffee roaster. So just we're applying heat. So dry heat to that, and that changes flavor, it changes color. When we roast things, they turn brown, and brown foods taste good, right? We like when cookies turn nice and brown. We like when French fries turn brown. We like when tater tots turn brown. The bottom of pizza crust turn brown, right? Can you think of any nasty brown foods, right? We like brown food. So this is important for flavor. This is also an important step to make sure that it's going to be safe to eat. So if we have those cocoa beans sitting in banana leaves, fermenting and getting stinky, and they're just laying out on the street, drying, we could have bugs get into them, mice get into them, chickens walking through, and then cats chasing the chickens that are walking over the drying beans, and then dogs chasing the cats, chasing the chickens through the beans, and then kids chasing the dogs, chasing the cats, chasing the chickens, right? All through that. And that can introduce contamination. That can introduce bacteria and germs that could make us sick. But when we roast them, that kills all of that bacteria. So we take the beans and crack them open, and on the inside there are cacao nibs. And the nibs, I think, look like Nerds candy, little tiny pebbles. Now, it's a lot of work to get that little tiny pebble on the inside. Just one of the factories in Hershey, Pennsylvania uses the equivalent of 1 million cacao pods every day. And that's just one factory and every day. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. So the nibs are taken out of the center of the beans, and then we can melt that down and we get chocolate liquor, which we can use as an ingredient, or we can take it one step further and separate the liquid from the solid and get cocoa powder and cocoa butter. You might see cocoa butter in cosmetics, in hand lotion. It's also an important ingredient used in the manufacture of chocolate. They can be mixed back together in different proportions depending on the product that you're making. There's actually extra cocoa powder left over, and that's one of the reasons that we have Hershey syrup today, because Milton Hershey had all this extra cocoa powder that he needed to do something with, so he had to figure out a new product that used up the cocoa powder. And we use cocoa powder in baking, and use those ingredients separately. But in chocolate, we mix them back together. So in chocolate, we've got cocoa powder, the cocoa butter. We also add sugar and milk that change the flavor, change the texture, some vanilla flavor, and also some lecithin. Has anybody ever heard of soy lecithin or know what it does? It's an emulsifier. Anybody know what an emulsifier does? So emulsifiers help water and fat stay together. So if you've ever made Italian dressing and the two layers separate, or you're walking through the parking lot and it's raining and there's oil on the parking lot, you can see the oil and the water separating. An emulsifier helps keep those two substances together that normally want to be apart. So what's the source of the fat in chocolate? What is it?
Milk.
Not the milk. Well, there is some fat in milk. The cocoa butter. Where's the source of water? The milk that want to separate out. So the soy lecithin helps keep those together. So when you read through an ingredient label, some people will say, oh, if there's ingredients on there that I don't recognize, I don't eat it. But the ingredients are there for a purpose. There's something simple like this so it doesn't separate. So as you're reading through, the things on the label are there for a purpose. So look them up and see what they're there, what their purpose is for. So, we are going to taste some different products today, and they're going to have different percentages of cacao in them. Either the cocoa powder or the butter mixed together, that equals our percentage of cacao. Then everything else, so if this is 70% cacao, it's 30% sugar and milk, or some ratio of that. Some chocolate bars will stay right in the front, 70%. Others don't tell you what percent they are. Some people think, well, and I've actually heard somebody on TV, a chef on the Food Network, say, oh, I only use the really good chocolate. Make sure you get at least 70%. It doesn't have anything to do with quality, if it's good or not. It's how dark of a chocolate, how strong a chocolate flavor there is. So, go ahead, we can start handing out. So you're going to receive our first sample, which is the 100% baking chocolate. Let me just demonstrate. So you're just gonna get a small little bit on the end of your spoon, and then just hold your spoon upright so it drips down on the spoon and doesn't drip all over your pants or the countertop.
Okay, so there's
And then
certain order
hold
that
on,
we're gonna try these.
and hold on to it. We're gonna all taste it together.
Okay.
So we taste this melted because it's easier to taste this way. So just a small amount, hang on to it until we get it. While you have your sample though, you can smell it. Don't touch it to your nose though. It's easier to taste it when it's melted.
It's the best chocolate throughout. It is.
So this is 100% cacao. All right, so smell it. Does it smell like brownies?
Yes.
Smells pretty good. Smells like hot fudge, right? All right, so let's go ahead and give that a taste. So what do you think?
I like it.
You like it? Does it taste like you expected it to taste?
I have
You thought
never
it was
seen
gonna be
anyone
bad?
eat so much of that chocolate.
He ate the whole spoonful.
Give me a second, I got it.
So, do you notice how this seizes when it gets in your mouth, so it gets hard and it kind of coats, and you try to swallow it and it just gets worse? So it's not quite what you expected. Can you imagine the first person to taste this and think, wow, this tastes really good. I think I should, make this into a billion-dollar industry, right? No.
Now guys, have you had this one before? I feel like most kids go into their kitchen, someone is baking, grandma, mom, whoever, and they see a big chunk of chocolate and they bug for it, and then they're like, yeah, sure, try it, and you take a huge bite out of it. Like every kid has to experience that. Okay? So, but now you understand this is completely unsweetened, no sugar. Okay?
Not really good.
No.
So, you have some crackers on your paper. Just take a small piece of one. These are unsalted saltines. These help clean our mouth out. They absorb all that residue. What do you think would happen if we ate crackers that had salt on the top? What would we taste? We taste the salt. And we just want it to be plain. So, small bite of cracker, little sip of water. You can still taste it.
Carrot water.
Now we're cleared out. Carrot water. Oh yeah, water fountain, carrot water. Yeah. All right. So the next one we're tasting is the 70%. When we taste chocolate, first thing we want to do is hold it up to our ear and snap it. So it has a good, nice, good snap. You can smell it. And when we taste chocolate, just put it in your mouth and let it melt. You don't just want to chew it up and quick swallow it like a dog treat, because you're not actually tasting it. So let it melt. You can use your tongue to smear it around your mouth. One of the methods that the professional taste testers will do is you'll open your mouth, but close your lips, and breathe in and out of your nose. You can take your tongue and smack it up against the roof of your mouth. Draw air into your mouth.
Guys, I want you to do that tonight at dinner. Like, tell when your parents are like, "What are you doing?" Say, "Well, I'm really tasting my food. I want to see how well you made them."
When we taste foods, we can refer to a tasting wheel for that particular food. So this is the tasting wheel for chocolate. It describes all the different flavors that you might taste.
Now, guys, this one isn't Hershey, okay? But you like this one?
Something with the dark chocolate, and it just got me as I was talking. It can have a characteristic that we call astringency. So kind of like a sting in the back of your throat a little bit. Does anybody taste that? Even after it's all gone, you still got that residue. You can still kind of taste it. You want to take your time when you're tasting, so you really taste all of the flavors. So after you've tasted that, another bite of cracker. Some kids in the last group really like the cracker.
I love that.
Of all the things, the unsalted saltines. So the next one we're tasting is Special Dark. How many of you have had Special Dark before? And did you like it? So you can have it in the bar form, small bars, the big bar like Mrs. Whitman has, or the Hershey Kiss. Now the Hershey Kiss is going to be hard to snap, so you're not going to be able to snap this one in half. But that challenge, yeah, you can try. So just like the last one, when you put it in your mouth, let it melt. You did snap it? What about the top off? Notice how fast they melt. What flavors do you taste in this one? I taste cinnamon when I eat this one. Anybody taste cinnamon?
I think the opposite.
Guys, one thing about, cooking and tasting and all that is everybody tastes things differently. Okay? So if you're hanging out with your friends and they're like, I really like green olives, and you're like, ew, how can you like them? We all taste things differently. So you really shouldn't give people hard times for liking other things. That can really make them feel bad. But that's another thing. I don't understand why chefs get upset when people send food back. Because if it's too salty for me, it's just because that's how I taste it. It might not be too salty for him or too spicy for him. We all taste things differently. Like he said he tastes, you guys taste cinnamon through this? I've never had, okay? But always remember that.
This one has a little bit more of a waxy texture too, as you move it around your mouth. Does it taste sweeter than you remember in the
Yes.
past? Tasting the dark?
It tastes a little bit less sweet than dark milk.
Like honey. Yeah, I taste some honey in that.
It tastes a little less sweet than milk chocolate.
Are you getting the same experience eating a Kiss as you would a bar?
It's the same chocolate.
Yeah, it was just
Shape-
easier to distribute.
I was just curious, like that.
The shape, may.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
You're laying against it.
May have an effect just on how fast it melts, but it should be similar.
I feel like Hershey
graham
Kisses
cracker,
don't melt that
six.
well.
You have to melt it very gently.
Yeah, because I mean, I bake cookies with them inside and they don't.
Well, baking chips are different.
No, Hershey
than-
Kisses.
Oh, Kisses.
But it has the cookie around it.
So we've been tasting in order, darkest to lightest, but we're gonna go a little bit out of order now. We're gonna save the Hershey Kiss for last, because that's what we're most familiar with. We're gonna do Symphony now. Now this is one that you'll be able to snap. This is only 26% cacao. So a lot of milk and sugar in this. This one doesn't crack, it's just kind of thuds. It's really soft. So remember to let it melt.
Question for you, Andy. What's your opinion? Do you feel like Hershey makes the best chocolate? Or do you think there's a better one out there?
Biased.
No, that's not good anymore. It doesn't have to.
Plain chocolate, I think others are better,
Do
but
you like the milk?
yeah, or like dark, but you can't beat a Hershey Kiss or a peanut butter cup, fast break, take 5. Those are some of my favorites. So those are better. What does this one taste like? Caramel, really sweet. Vanilla. If you didn't know this was chocolate, would you think we're maybe eating a caramel?
And you know what's weird?
How many of you have had Symphony before?
You said caramel, I would be like, oh my god.
Not a common one, but it's still got a lot of cream. That's because there's a lot of it. Only 26% cacao. There's a lot of milk and a lot of sugar in here. All right, so your last bite of cracker.
I'm not even done with that.
Oh, that's true. So the professional taste testers also only drink room temperature water, because if you drink cold water, that can kind of numb. Is there a ghost pushing your cup? It can kind of numb your taste buds. Kind of like when you eat ice cream, the first bite or two tastes really good, then after that, your taste buds kind of dull and numb, and it's not as flavorful. So room temperature water. All right, last one. Hershey chocolate. Give that a smell. Does it smell familiar? Smell like Hershey?
Chocolate world. It's not bad if you're biting it.
Remember to let it melt. Does it taste different than you remember? Now that you've been tasting the dark ones? Was anybody surprised that you liked the darker chocolate and you didn't think you... There's a lot of people say, oh, I don't like dark chocolate. But then when you taste it like this, they do. Which one was your favorite? The 70, wow. All right, if you had to pick a favorite, whose favorite was the 100%? What? All right, whose favorite was the 70%?
Either the 70 or the 60.
Oh, 70 or 70. How about the special dark? One. Oh, I like the special dark. I'll raise my hand for real with you.
It's tied with the 70.
Yeah. How about the Symphony? How about the Hershey? Wow, so the 70%? Now, you probably wouldn't have thought that coming in.
Now, when I went to buy this, they range. So Ghirardelli is some really good chocolate.
Yeah.
So does anybody have any questions about Hershey or chocolate or Penn State or food science?
Take a guess. What do you think is the #1 selling Hershey product? Let me guess.
Hershey milk chocolate bar.
Yeah. It's actually soft.
And it doesn't have, what do you think it is? Yeah, it like surpasses it by,
Like 2 billion with a B
yeah.
of sales. Reese's #1.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Is there an actual difference between regular cocoa powder and unsweetened cocoa powder? Because on the package, it all just says cocoa powder.
Well, they don't want you to take hot cocoa mix, like Swiss Miss with the sugar and stuff in
Yeah,
it.
this is just the baking stuff.
It's the same. Because some recipes will call for unsweetened cocoa
Yeah.
powder because they don't want you to, get the cocoa mix because that's sugar,
And then some
milk
call
powder,
for baking powder.
little baby marshmallows in it. Cool. Well, thank you guys for your attention today. You were awesome participants. Put all your trash, scrape the crumbs, not onto the floor, onto your paper.